Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depends on when you're watching this recording of Thursday's session of Ask the SCSA. So this morning, what we have is we have a couple presentations that we're going to be putting on. And what we'll do is we will start by welcoming our panelists. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please start introducing yourself. I'd like to start with Byron, please.
Sounds good. Good morning. I'm Byron Junup. I'm the acting senior program auditor with the SCSA.
Thanks, Byron. Sundee.
Hi, I'm Sundee Zarowski. I am a safety advisor with the SCSA, NCSO, and an OHSP. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Sundee. Curtis.
Hey, I'm Curtis Broad, safety advisor with the SCSA.
Thanks, Curtis. Jar?
Morning, everyone. I'm Jaria Samrat, the safety trainer out of the Saskatoon office.
Great. And last but not least, Kelly, please.
I'm Kelly Champagne, and I'm the Program Services Manager with the SCSA, and I look after the core and C-Core, NCSO, and HSA programs. And I'm excited to be bringing you guys some very interesting information and new information about what's happening with our core program today.
That's great, Kelly. Look forward to that too. So without further ado, why don't we get started on our presentations? Just a reminder to anyone watching live with us, either on Facebook Live, please put your questions through on Facebook, or if you're joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A function. We will have someone moderating or monitoring, I guess, the Facebook feed, and we'll be passing questions through the Facebook feed to the Q&A function on our Zoom. So, like I said, please, Byron, would you take it away?
Sure, sounds great. Thanks, Mike. So what we're going to look at here is just it's a presentation. It's a brief overview of our return to core auditing. So it is our goal in returning to core auditing that the program service auditors are able to provide a quality core audit while ensuring the safety of the employees of the companies that we're auditing, as well as our auditors, without compromising the integrity of the core program. We can just move on and discuss what that looks like moving forward here. So public health orders have required us to look at new ways to perform audits. For everyone's safety, we are restricting person-to-person contact as much as possible during the audit. This will involve digital documentation review, virtual meetings, and virtual site observations. On June 15th, we will begin to resume core auditing, and while restrictions are in place, companies scheduling audits will have to have the following items. So we will need you to have a computer with a camera, a microphone, and an internet connection. The previous 12 months of documentation in a digital format, or the ability to scan the documentation for upload to our secure FTP site. Large companies will be asked to submit a job list from the past 12 months, and the auditor will advise which job site documentation will be required to eliminate those companies having to upload very large quantities of documentation. We'll need a private room with a computer, phone, or tablet. It'll need to be provided for the interview process. When we're looking at site interviews, that could be as simple as a cell phone in a vehicle. A portable device such as a tablet or smartphone for site observations with an internet or data connection. So looking at the auditing process. So the audits will be booked over a 4-day period. An advisor will be available to assist with the organization of documentation if requested, if needed. Program Services Administration will send an email link to our secure FTP server with directions on how to upload your documentation. And there will be a set of file folders. It has been set up on the FTP site to make it easier for you to organize the documentation and upload it. And it'll also be easier for the auditor to review come your audit date. So you'll begin uploading documentation as soon as possible to ensure that everything is completed and ready for the audit. So documentation upload will take place in the 3 weeks prior to the audit. If you have a web-based, if you have a web-based program such as SiteDocs, you can simply provide the auditor with access to that. And just a brief discussion on that with the SiteDocs access. You can either create us an account with a password, or a lot of companies in the past have granted us an admin level of access. It's a higher level, and we can see a little bit more there. So the auditor will contact the company about 3 weeks before the scheduled audit date to review the process and walk everyone through it. It's a new process. So the opening and closing meetings will be done virtually via Teams. Something I want to stress here is that you do not need to have Microsoft Teams installed on your computer or phone, any of the devices being utilized throughout the audit. The auditor will send you an invitation with a link. You just need to click on that link and it will download an interface and connect you to Teams. So looking at we discussed the opening and closeout meeting. Interviews, again, will be done via Teams. And with the interview process, much the same as when we do them in person, we just need that quiet private area. So moving on to talk about site observations. So site observations will be done virtually utilizing Teams. The auditor will direct the core contact as to what they would like to observe. In the event that virtual site observations cannot be performed, or the SCSA auditor deems that in-person site visits are necessary, the auditor may travel to site. Many of these scenarios we can very effectively achieve meaningful, thorough observations virtually. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, and it will occur that in person is needed to do it properly. So travel to job sites will be restricted to day trips. No overnight travel will be accommodated at this time. Adhering to travel restrictions issued by the government of Saskatchewan, we will not be able to audit any sites in northern Saskatchewan, again, at this time. Auditors required to travel to site will have infectious diseases PPE kits along with their regular PPE. So that will include masks, hand sanitizer, gloves, and disinfecting wipes. For sites requiring anything above that specialized PPE, the company will be required to provide that to the auditor. Anything, such as an N95 mask, plastic face shields, any site-specific requirements. So once that's all completed and the audit results are compiled, at the closeout meeting, again, we'll be utilizing Teams for that. A signed copy of the audit tool will be sent to the company, and a copy of the evaluation summary page will then be signed by the client and submitted to the auditor, either via email or transferred to the FTP site. So we realize that not every company will be able to meet the technical requirements for a remote audit, and that's fine. These companies will be given 90-day extensions on their milestones or the core expirations, with the expectation that when the restrictions are lifted, we would perform the audit using traditional methods in person. So So for us, for getting caught up, we've had some audits postponed in the recent time frame here. So we are contacting companies scheduled for audits in June and July and working with them to determine if remote auditing is an option for them. So audit reminder packages have been sent out to companies due in August, advising them of the remote auditing procedure that we are now utilizing. We will begin contacting all companies who have been issued extensions due to COVID and offering to schedule a remote audit date for them. Companies requiring baseline audits are asked to contact Program Services Department and to set up their remote audit. So if you are coming due for a baseline audit or have received a core C-Core audit reminder package, please call as soon as possible to book your audit date. The audit schedule will be very busy for the next several months, and we will try our best to catch up to ensure a date that will work for you. Contact us via email as soon as possible. The email for program services is SCSA programinfo@scsaonline.ca. And I just want to say thank you for your patience. This is a new process for us and for you, for the companies being audited. Thank you for the support that's been shown for the remote auditing process. And please contact us if you have any questions.
I'm just going to jump in on the tail end of what Byron had said there and just reinforce the fact that this is a new process for us, and we are working with the companies on a one-to-one basis because everybody's unique. Everyone's got a different expiration date for their core or their milestones. Everybody has a different scope of work. Everybody has different job sites. So it really, in these times with having to do a little bit of a workaround for some of the audits, we really are making that effort to try and work individually with each company. So if this seems intimidating when you look at all this, it's not really. Just contact our offices, preferably through email, and we'll be in touch with you, and we're pretty confident we can work something out for you.
Thank you, Byron and Kelly. I'd like to give you guys some credit for really jumping ahead or jumping on this and adapting to the situation. This seems like we're getting a lot of the processes in place and really getting streamlining, keeping business moving forward. So just like all of our members. Okay, so I'd like to move on. Like I said before, anyone that has questions based off of the remote auditing process, questions for Kelly or Byron, please type those into the Q&A function, and we'll get to those questions after the presentations. Next up, Sandy, would you please, if you want to, you can share your screen and go ahead.
Okay, Mike, how does that look?
Yeah, it looks great, Sandy.
Looks good. Okay, so silica is found in many construction materials today. So this presentation is intended to bring workers and employers an awareness regarding exposures to inhalable silica, which can be fatal, causing disease in the lungs. So today's webinar will include topics surrounding silica, such as what is silica, materials and forms of silica, tasks and job exposures, silicosis and its effects, jobs at risk, and safe exposure controls. Running two different PowerPoints here. Okay, the Encyclopedia Britannica states, silica, also called silicon dioxide, is a compound of the two most abundant elements in the Earth's crust, silicon and oxygen. The mass of the Earth's crust is 59% silica, the main constituent of more than 95% of the known rocks. Silica has three main crystalline varieties. So quartz, by far the most abundant, tridymite, and cristobalite. A little emergency overview. Silica is colorless crystals. It's odorless. It will not burn, and it's very toxic. Prolonged or repeated exposure causes damage to lungs. It's a cancer hazard, and it may cause cancer if inhaled. So some common silica-containing materials are concrete, block, cement, and mortar, masonry, tiles, brick, and refractory brick, granite, sand fill, dirt, and topsoil, asphalt containing rock or stone, abrasives used for sandblasting. These materials can be made into dust by cutting, grinding, blasting, sweeping, jackhammering, drilling, and crushing. Other sources of silica can be plastics, paints, fiberglass, marble, slate, soil, mortar, plasters, and shingles. Methods for containment and cleanup. Avoid dry sweeping. If necessary, use a dust suppressant such as water. Do not use compressed air for cleanup, and collect using shovels and scoops or approved HEPA vacuum and place in a suitable container for disposal. So if anybody's ever sanded drywall or swept a dirty floor without a mask, I know I have, you can imagine the exposure, the risk that you're getting to your lungs. So if you were working in the area pictured here, imagine breathing that dust day after day. What do you think that exposure is going to do to your lungs? And did you know that the Saskatchewan Employment Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations identifies laws for silica processing and abrasive blasting, which applies to any place of employment or work site where a silica process is used. Part 24, Occupational Health and Safety Regulations, number 346, right through to 348. Some examples of jobs and tasks that could put you at risk of breathing silica are highway and bridge construction and repair, building construction, demolition, and repair, abrasive blasting, masonry work, concrete finishing, and drywall finishing. Crystalline silica is more likely to be present in the air when you're cutting, sawing, drilling, or crushing concrete, bricks, cement, ceramic tile, rocks, or stone. The processes that can put you at risk, many building demolition processes, power cutting of stone, facade renovations, all that fancy brick that's on the front of those houses, abrasive or hydroblasting of concrete, cleanup activities like dry sweeping or pressurized air blowing of concrete or sand dust, tunnel excavation or earth moving of soils with high silica content. Silica's many uses include refractory brick used in foundries, power plants, and cement, filter media for water filtration systems, sandblasting abrasives, building materials such as concrete, grout, and plaster, glass and fiberglass, components for electronics, fiber optics, lasers, and timekeeping devices. So how does silica dust hurt you? When crystalline silica particles are inhaled, they make their way deep into your lungs, which in turn begin to develop scar tissue, nodules around the particles. In general, the more you are exposed to silica, the greater you are at risk. Crystalline silica dust can cause a disabling, sometimes fatal disease called silicosis. The fine particles are deposited into the lungs, causing thickening and scarring of the lung tissue. The scar tissue restricts the lung's ability to extract oxygen from the air. The damage is permanent. Though it can take years for full symptoms to appear, silica exposure has been directly linked to lung cancers, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, kidney disease, and it can lead to arthritis and other health problems. Slow down. Okay, the warmth and beauty imparted from surface coverings using natural stones such as quartz, granite, and marble have long been considered a luxury item in new homes, as well as kitchen and bathroom restorations. Crystalline silica is a basic part of the earth, sand, and soil and is found in many minerals, including natural stone, materials used in today's common constructions, materials in countertops in the kitchen and bathrooms. The table shown here is from the American Geological Institute. It describes the typical silica quartz content of common natural and engineered stone. So compared to the other stone surfaces, quartz is set apart in that it is not wholly organic. Quartz slabs are manufactured using 95% crushed quartz stone and 5% compound resins. The synthetic component makes it the easiest stone surface to maintain and increases color variety, durability, and stain resistant. Unfortunately, quartz countertops have over twice the amount of crystalline silica as granite and nearly 10 times the amount of silica found in marble. Workers in the natural stone cut industry, as well as those involved in finishing and installation of both natural and manufactured stone, are at risk of significant silica exposure. In both industries, production operators such as sawyers, inspectors, including quality control technicians, and staff who perform maintenance and housekeeping duties in manufacturing facilities also may be exposed to hazardous levels of airborne silica dust. Depending on the stone in question, countertops may contain over 90% silica. The highest silica levels are associated with manufactured countertops, where the pigments and adhesives comprise the remaining materials. Silica content is generally lower in natural stone products, calcium-based stones, including limestone and certain varieties of marble, calcite, dolomite, and onyx. My girlfriend's a geologist. I'm never going to hear the end of mispronouncing any of these words. So they contain little or no silica. In contrast, granite can contain up to 45% silica. So did you know that approximately 900,000 Canadians are occupationally exposed to silica on a regular basis? Among the most at risk are construction workers, heavy equipment operators, plasterers, and drywallers. Other construction tasks like drywalling, where workers who sand drywall joint compounds are often exposed to high concentrations of dust, and in some cases respirable silica. Drywall joint compounds are made from many ingredients: talc, calcite, mica, gypsum, and silica. Some of these have been associated with varying degrees of eyes, nose, throat, and respiratory tract irritations. Over time, breathing the dust from the drywall joint compounds may cause persistent throat and earway irritation, coughing, phlegm production, and breathing difficulties, similar to those of asthma. Smokers or workers with sinus or respiratory conditions are at a higher risk of health problems. When silica is present, workers are faced with an increased risk of silicosis and lung cancer. Several lightweight sanding systems are available to help control drywall workers exposed to the sanding procedure. NIOSH study results suggest that construction workers' dust exposure might be reduced by simply by changing from hand sanding to pole sanding. This change is even more important when working overhead. The pole increases the space between the worker and the sanding surface, which in turn reduces the amount of dust close to the worker's nose and mouth. In addition to lower exposures, vacuum sanding can help the sander, subcontractor, general contractor, and building owner in other ways. The dramatic reduction in airborne dust exposure results in a much cleaner work area during and after sanding. For workers, the clean working environment is more comfortable. It's less irritating to the eyes, nose, and throat, is less likely to require respiratory protection. For the subcontractor, a comfortable worker is likely to be more productive and be absent less often and require fewer breaks for fresh air. The savings and reduced regulatory liability given by lowering respiratory protection will be passed from the subcontractor to the building owner. Other cost savings will result from a cleaner environment that reduces dirt, cleanup time, and repair or repainting of stained floors and carpets. So, as stated previously, one of the highest risks for workers repeatedly exposed to silica is silicosis, which is a non-reversible lung disease with symptoms that can range from a shortness of breath and chest pains to an eventual inability to breathe that could turn fatal. For people with a smoking habit or existing lung conditions such as asthma, exposure to silica can seriously compound debilitating lung and breathing problems. Silicosis is caused when crystalline silica particles are less than 10 microns in diameter are inhaled and deposited into the lungs, respirable silica. Lung tissue reacts by developing lumps and scarring around the trapped silica particles. When the lumps and scar tissue grow too large, breathing becomes more difficult and death may result. It is a disabling, non-reversible, and often fatal lung disease caused by a long-term breathing of silica dust. It is also known to cause lung cancer and is considered carcinogenic to humans. Additionally, exposures to silica have been associated with other respiratory diseases like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, including bronchitis and emphysema, tuberculosis, as well as kidney and immune system disease. There is no cure for silicosis and treatment options are limited. This disease is 100% preventable if measures are taken to reduce exposures. Some of the signs of silicosis are shortness of breath caused by the swelling in the lungs and the chest lymph nodes, severe cough, weakness, fatigue, loss of appetite, and respiratory failure. A worker may develop any 3 types of silicosis depending on concentrations of the silica dust and the duration of the exposures. So chronic silicosis develops after 10 or more years of exposure to crystalline silica at relatively low concentrations. Accelerated silicosis develops 5 to 10 years after initial exposure to crystalline silica at high concentrations. And acute silicosis develops within a few weeks or 4 to 5 years after exposures to very high concentrations of crystalline silica. So provincial and federal authorities have established occupational exposure limits and guidelines to help manage the risks posed by airborne silica. But research has shown that long-term contact with even small quantities of the mineral may have serious impact on your breathing and overall health over time. So if you're unsure of the different products and processes being used around your site, you can reduce the potential risks of exposure by wearing the appropriate protective gear, PPE. For drywall compounds, you should always refer to the SDS safety data sheets for the recommended exposure control methods and other pertinent information. So we have a video here. As you know, people learn differently. There's multiple styles of learning, verbal, kinetic, hands-on, auditory, and visual. So for all you visual learners, this short 2-minute video from WorkSafe BC is a really great, video. Let me just see if I can make it work though. So. We'll just access it differently here for you. I apologize, our internets are a little bit slow around the office today.
substances on Earth. It can be found in materials like sand, and rock, and building products like concrete and brick. When a worker
Sandy, I'm seeing your PowerPoint right now, but I am not being able to see the video.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Let's just go back into.
Just while Sunday's getting that set up right now, I think to elaborate just a little bit more on respiratory, using your PPE and stuff, just to keep in mind that if we are using respiratory devices, that we should have training for fit, care, and use to this equipment as well. So just keeping that in mind, if you are putting a mask on for any reasons, N95 and greater, there should be some sort of fit testing as well as training on the fit, care, and use for that respirator as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in there for you, Sunday. If I don't know if you're covering it in your presentation, sorry if you are, but
Right, no,
yeah,
that's great.
yeah, just to touch on that.
Can you see the screen now?
We sure can.
Okay, let's try that.
That's working. Yeah.
Perfect.
silica. It's one of the most common substances on Earth. It can be found in materials like sand and rock, and building products like concrete and brick. When a worker cuts, grinds, or drills materials that contain silica, dangerous crystalline silica dust is released into the air. As the worker breathes, silica crystals flow into his mouth and nose and down the air passages deep into the lungs. The tiny crystals enter the small, fragile air sacs where oxygen is absorbed into the blood. Immune system cells, called macrophages, engulf and try to dissolve the crystals, but they are unable to. Over time, more and more crystals build up inside the macrophage cells. Macrophages carry the silica into the walls of the lung, where they die. Scar tissue forms around the dead cells and spreads as more cells die. This damage can continue even after the exposure to silica stops. Eventually, so much scar tissue forms that the lungs can no longer function. For information on how to protect yourself from silica exposure, visit cdc.com.
Sandy,
Yes.
would you be able to, I think, I didn't want to cut off the video. It was really choppy, and I think the sound quality was really low. You want to, I think the visual was still really good to see. You want to just go through a little bit of what they were talking about?
Well, it kind of goes through it. That was more for the visual learners. We've kind of touched points in throughout the presentation. It just goes a little bit more into the lungs, and it gives a real visual kind of identity or process for anybody that's interested. We can post the link at the end here if anybody wants to review the video, and hopefully it streams a little bit better for you. See if I can post it, or here we go. There is a little bit more of the presentation left, Mike, by the way, sorry. What are we seeing here?
I can see your PowerPoint right now.
Okay, perfect. We're getting close. I should say thank you to Justin for assembling the majority of these slides. Justin Brooks, another advisor. Okay, back on track here. So, to most effectively reduce silica exposure, employees should understand what crystalline silica is, who is at risk of exposure, and the dangers of high levels of exposure. Preventing exposure to silica is the best way to protect our health. Always refer to the hierarchy of control. Hi.
Do you want to start the presentation? Sorry.
Okay, sorry, it's not working, the screen share?
No, my computer is super slow, so I think it's just a bad network all in all. There we go, perfect.
Speaking of slow, okay. Let's go back a few slides.
There we go. Good job.
Not that there's much there. Okay, so engineering controls, always refer to the hierarchy of controls and consider engineering controls first. There are a few different ways of keeping dust levels down on your construction site, which in turn will keep silica particles from becoming airborne. Engineering controls are mechanical processes used to eliminate exposure to dust. Engineering controls remove the dust from the air or provide a barrier between the worker and the dust. Examples of engineering controls used to prevent exposure to crystalline silica include wet processes such as wet abrasive blasting or wet cutting, the installation of local ventilation hoods, installing dust collection systems onto machines or equipment, dust control additives, enclosures around the work processes, automated processes, example robotics, and use of alternative equipment, use of a HEPA vacuum instead of compressed air or dry sweeping to remove debris from cracks in, say, road repair. Employers and employees should consider to substitute, if at all possible, with a safer material, changing work practices to reduce exposures, administrative controls, install signage warning workers of the hazards and informing them about the required protective equipment needed in the areas where they may be exposed to silica. Use work practices to reduce exposure is often less expensive than other control measures. However, workers must be trained to use practices properly and have their work activities monitored by the employer. Control dust exposure with work practices, again, such as water sprays, ventilation cabinets. Many workers will opt for methods like the wet cutting and vacuum dust collection systems, intense ventilation or hosing down of work sites to keep the silica dust from forming. Use protective equipment or other protective measures. Ensure respirator is suitable for the job, certified, and that the worker has been fit tested by a certified respirator fit tester. So what you were discussing previously there, Curtis, make sure that your workers know how to use their PPE appropriately and are trained in it. Employers can help protect themselves by, employees, sorry, can help protect themselves. So by changing out of your work clothes before going home, participate in the training, exposure monitoring, health screening, and surveillance programs to monitor any adverse health effects caused by exposures. Be aware of the work practices and tasks that create exposures. Be aware of the health hazards and that smoking adds to lung damage caused by silica exposures. Hygiene. Workers must not eat, drink, or use tobacco products in areas contaminated by crystalline silica. The hands and face should be washed outside of the dusty area before you or smoking. Educate workers to understand the hazards associated with crystalline silica. Workers must participate in training and monitoring programs. Occupational Health and Safety Regulation 350 states cleanup of work sites. An employer or contractor shall ensure that all work sites and work-related areas where dust from a silica process may affect the health or safety of a worker are regularly cleaned using a vacuum that has a HEPA filter on the exhaust, or where vacuum is not practicable, by using wet methods. Whoa. Just going right to the end. Occupational Health and Safety Regulation 348 Warning of workers. An employer shall warn all workers who, in the course of employment, are likely to be engaged in a silica process or are likely to be exposed to silica dust of the dangers to health from the inhalation of dust containing silica. So planning is essential to reduce exposures and protect workers. Protect workers from overexposure to silica dust by developing your written exposure control plan that meets or exceeds the requirements laid out in the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations. A written exposure plan should contain at least the minimum following elements. So you want to identify what silica is, purpose of the exposure control plan, responsibilities, risk identification, assessment, and control, a description of the tasks in the workplace that involve exposure to respirable crystalline silica, education and training, safe work practices, a description of engineering controls, work practices, and respiratory protection used to limit employee exposure to respiratory silica for each task. A description of the housekeeping measures used to limit employee exposure to crystalline silica. A description of the procedures used to restrict access to work areas when necessary to minimize the number of employees exposed to the respirable crystalline silica and their level of exposure, including exposures generated by other employees. Health monitoring program and documentation. Employers are also required to review and evaluate the effectiveness of the written exposure control plan, at least annually, to update it as necessary and designate a competent person to implement the plan. So get the correct PPE. Once you have a sense of your exposure level, you'll want to take a look at a full range of respiratory protection products to find the right product for your level of risk. Whether it be a lightweight disposable respirator, a half-face respirator, or full-face protection. If it is not practicable or feasible to substitute, use engineering controls or change your work practices to control the exposure. Personal protective equipment may be needed and is always your last line of defense. Many types of respirators are available, and it is important to select the correct ones for the work being done. In addition to respiratory protection, workers need to be provided with appropriate protective clothing at the work site. This is done to make sure that the street clothes do not be, they're contaminated with silica. Your eyes should be protected to prevent the silica particles from entering them, causing irritation or damage. Work practices can be implemented to reduce potential exposures. Although the use of personal protective equipment may initially seem to be less costly, workers need to be trained in how to use it. Employers need to monitor use and ensure that the PPE is maintained properly. Issues such as heat stress, restricted vision, and allergic reactions to the equipment material need to be evaluated when personal protective is being selected. Stay informed of the rules and regulations around managing silica exposure. It's important to stay updated with legal limits, testing methods, and the latest data on how you can minimize the risk. Know your limits. OSHA has established permissible exposure limits for silica in which the maximum allowable limit a worker is allowed to be exposed to in an 8-hour shift is identified. Did you know that the SCSA has an app for that? You can download the SCSA app for free from your app store. You can also download one of our toolbox talks on silica from our app or from our homepage. So I guess that wraps it all up for you guys. Thank you for taking the time to view the presentation. For any questions, please feel free to contact us, and we're always here to help you out in whichever way we can help you if possible. Thanks, Mike. Back to you.
Thanks, Sandy, and thanks for that presentation. Anyone that's been using Zoom or these platforms for meetings, definitely, I'm sure, understands that sometimes there's a lag in the Zoom process, and that's so really good job navigating through that, and great presentation. So now we're going to get on to our question and answer period. We do have representation from our auditing department. We have representation through our training department and our advisory services department as well. So any questions that come through, please put them in. We'll try our best to get to all questions. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to contact the SCSA if you would like an answer promptly, and talk to the corresponding department, and we'll get to your questions, give you some good answers. Okay, so let's start off by going to a question just on the tail end of your presentation, Sandy, and this is for anyone to answer. There is some questions pertaining to silica. So first question, does all sand have silica in it?
I think that's a great question. I think to answer that one, it'd be best to refer to the MSDS on particular sands and stuff that you might be working with, to ensure that if they do contain any kind of chemicals or specifically silica, I feel like that would be the best possible way to find out what might be in that sand. Just refer to the SDS sheets for that.
So thanks, Curtis. Another question. What do I do if my employer doesn't tell me something has silica in it? How do I know? And Curtis, you may have answered that already, but if you'd like to reiterate.
Yeah, like I said, your SDS sheets, that's where you're going to see what kind of chemicals, contaminants, how to deal with it, you know, certain things like that. It gives a general breakdown of that specific material and what hazards and chemicals and, you know, everything that might be associated to that specific material.
Yeah. Anyone else? So I think I'll add to that, Curtis. Any of the products that we're using in our workplace, there needs to be information from the manufacturer of the product. So if there's not an SDS sheet for it, you know, maybe it's a material instead of a controlled product or something like that. You can always refer to your manufacturer and start asking those questions via that, or even through your supplier should be able to get you some of that answers. On to the next question. And this one's there's a couple of questions. I'm going to kind of mash them together here. When working around silica, is a dust mask just as good as a respirator with cartridges, or can I just try to stay out of it and not inhale the dust? What would be the recommendation there?
It would depend on the process that you're using. The finer, like if you're grinding, sawing, the smaller the particulate, the higher the hazard to enter your lungs. So you would want to make sure you're using the appropriate respirator for that tasks. We had a presentation a week or two ago from Kieran, if you recall, and he had some good visual demonstration there on the sizes, the microns of the particulate that can enter your lung. Always refer to that. And again, like you said, Mike, checking your manufacturer just to make sure that what you're doing and that particulate size that you are covering with the appropriate respirator.
Great, thanks, Sandy. One more on silica. I've heard that the silica will be the next asbestos. Is there any truth to this?
There has been some previous research that I have done that has linked it. I don't have an actual valid source for you at the time right now, but there has been some rumor of this, as it does damage.
Well, Mike,
Yeah, go ahead, Curtis.
I was just going to say, I think where that comes down to is what we're finding with asbestos, and you touched on it in your presentation. This can take 10 years or more before you show any signs or symptoms of it. So, you know, if you're that person that's been in construction for over 10 years in, you know, concrete or any kind of work like that, you're getting ready to retire and you're starting having troubles breathing and everything like that. Maybe all those years of just saying, you know, I got this and I'll be okay, it's not going to pay off in the end, because now you're getting ready to retire and you're having, you know, your truck around on oxygen and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of where that mentality comes from, is it's the next asbestos, is because you can't see it, you know, finding out what's in it and things like that. And then you don't have the fast effects. It's the long-term effects that are associated with it. So I kind of think that's where that might come from. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's what the presentation today was. Just it was an awareness, just to bring a little bit of awareness to the workers and the workforce about the subject.
Yeah, great guys. Asbestos causes cancer. Silica causes cancer. So in that regards, absolutely. So great answers, guys. Okay, on to the training department. Will online training be available moving forward after COVID-19?
This question is actually brought up a few times that I've been able to sit in on this. And the answer to that is not definitive at the moment, just because we're trying to go through things kind of on a bi-weekly basis, keeping up with the requirements from Saskatchewan, our government, and just the COVID-19 restrictions overall. So as soon as that information is sourced out somehow, I'm sure that we'll keep up with all of our people in the business as soon as we know.
Thanks, Jaria. And another one for you. And this is, there's a lot of question marks in this question, so maybe you can just wrap it all up into an answer. For online training, do I need a laptop? Can I do it on my cell phone? If I need a laptop, do I need 2 screens, or will one do fine?
So we highly recommend that any computer used for any of our instructor-led online courses has visual and audio capability. This has to do with the fact that we do share a screen, have a lot of information in our PowerPoint presentation, and there are additional requirements generally sent via email for any links or additional things that we may require during the duration of the course. This also includes items like the regulations and acts being sent along with for any time that we bring those up during the class, that everyone has the opportunity to also follow through with it. So it does definitely maximize the training experience when you have all of the required portions of it. We have had people use their phones. It just doesn't do as well as it should. So just if you have the possibility to do that, please understand that, and also understand that there are requirements prior to the course starting. So once you're in the course already, and if you don't have the items set up as we have already requested, it does make it very hard for you to kind of get everything that you want out of the training courses. So definitely reach out to us if you have any additional questions or have specifics on that item.
Thanks, Jar. Now we're going to head over to some questions for the auditing department. Here's a question. Is there someone that can help me with uploading my audit? Can someone check to see if I did it right?
I can help you out with that. There will be instructions spelled out in an email sent to you prior to beginning your audit on how to work the FTP and what the secure password is and all those details. As well, the advisor that will be working with your company is copied on that email, and the advisor will be in contact with you to help you organize your files prior to uploading if you want. If you're fine on your own, that's good too. But the advisor can work with you quite closely in terms of the best way to organize it and upload it. If you have any technical issues, contact our program services department directly. But for actual organization and what needs to be up there, the advisors will be working quite closely. And then subsequent to that, the auditors will be doing a little bit of a check prior to the actual audit date, and they will be taking a look and see what's in the files and making sure that everything looks like it's there that they need. They won't be actually going through all the documentation, but doing a little cursory check and contacting the companies if they feel that there might be some things missing. Byron, did I miss anything on there?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Kelly. And in that regard, I guess to add on to that from an advisory services standpoint, long before your audit arrives, advisory services, if you have an advisor that you're working with as a member company or someone going for CCOR or CORE, you have an upcoming audit that you know is coming and you're going to be coming ahead with this, and you want to get ahead of the game and start organizing your files in an appropriate manner, get a hold of your advisor, get a hold of a advisor, and we can help you with the organization well before your audit, so that when it comes up and you get that letter, you have a lot of things that are already organized. Here's another question. With the 90-day extension that is granted for companies that can't do the online submission of documentation, what if the restriction is not lifted by the 90 days? Will I be granted another extension?
So if you've had your first 90 days and we haven't been able to get to your audit, and again, we'll grant you another 90 days. Beyond that, we won't be granting any more extensions. At that point, we will figure out a way, and we were already doing that to a certain extent with the exceptions for coming out to site when it's absolutely necessary. But we'll work out some protocols where the auditors can actually go to site, be safe, have limited interaction with people in terms of interviews and site visits, and take into account the safety precautions that will be needed for doing the documentation reviews as well. Like we said earlier, we're going to try and do the remote process first. And I think the feedback that we've had so far on that has been really positive. A lot of people seem to really be embracing this. So we're really glad, because it helps us get through our backlog. And so hopefully everybody will be able to be cleared up one way or another. And I think we're all hoping that some of the restrictions will be lifted by the time the fall comes along.
Thank you. Next question. We have time for one or two more questions. How soon after an audit will I receive my CORE or CCOR certification? Or these are requested and required for some of my contracts.
Okay, that actually is in the hands of the company. Once they submit their corrective action plan and it's accepted by our program services department, then they'll receive their certificate. Now, if there's any charges associated with the audit, if you're a non-member, there would be a daily audit fee, or if there's travel or accommodation, which doesn't apply right now, but any of those charges, the invoice would have to be paid, and as soon as that's done, then we issue your core certificate.
Thank you. Another question. I have a meeting with an advisor next week with Zoom. I've never used Zoom before. Do I need to download it first?
Yeah. Yes, it needs to be downloaded first.
Okay, great. Thank you, Curtis. That brings us to the end of our hour. We, like I said, there's some questions we weren't able to get to. We will be back on Tuesday morning. That's May 26th for another Ask the SCSA. I'd like to thank all our panelists. I'd like to thank our presenters for being here, and everyone viewing this today. So please join us again next week, and have a safe weekend. Thank you, everyone.